The relationship between police and community policing forum structures has improved since the July unrest. Most areas in eThekwini were targeted and shops looted when the unrest took place. The chairman of the Community Policing Forum in eThekwini Central Cluster, that's Imtiaz Syed, says the CPF structures, they worked hard to try and quell the tensions within that community. He joins us now. Mr. Syed, thank you very much for your time. Is that indeed your version or your assessment right now, that the relationship between the South African Police Service and the CPF, or the Community Policing Forums, it has improved since July last year?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me, firstly. And yes, when we're talking about CPFs and the relationship between police, I think the realization of the importance of having community involved in community policing and how that partnership actually can benefit SAPS in terms of law enforcement has come to the fore since the July unrest. And I think harnessing the energies that had come out of the unrest to start building those relationships prim and proper moving forward has now really started bearing fruit.
What kind of improvements have you been observing?
Well, what we've seen, currently, we're currently in the climate of actually re-electing the entire structures of all the provinces. So basically it was a revitalization in terms of saying that structures that were not active, they are now active, and the importance of that we see from the side of SAPS, where there's clear evidence of how important it is for station commanders to have their CPFs active and mobilizing them in a different type of understanding of how they move forward. And previously, we got to speak to it from a perspective of social cohesion and understanding, whereas the unrest did come across to everybody as something that was very shocking. But to understand why it happened, the circumstances under which it happened, and all of that is now coming to the fore from the CPF to say that it's not only about us standing up and fighting crime, but it's also for us to start understanding the plight of people and now putting things into perspective so that we can eliminate those sorts of ills within society and not have these sorts of things happening moving forward.
Yeah. Imtiaz, there have been suggestions, at least by some people. I won't say there is a suggestion throughout South Africa, but there have been perhaps worries, would be a better way to put it, that we might be plunged back into something similar like we saw last year. And that's primarily because of the cost of living that is rising ever so quickly. Talk to us about what it is that you have put in place. Are there any early warning systems perhaps that have since been developed since the unrest? Because you will remember, social media was part of what the authorities were saying is the petrol that keeps being put into this fire to fan the flames. I'm asking, therefore, whether there is anything you are doing to use the same digital spaces in order to devise some kind of early warning systems.
Absolutely. So when it comes down to us having an understanding of why the insurrection happened, we got to speak to it in terms of what really happened. Most of it was opportunistic instead of some actual movement that was moving towards a particular agenda. Many people, heard things over social media, saw it on Facebook, saw videos on WhatsApp, and continued to behave in the same manner. And that was a great cause for concern. Even during the last threats of unrest, which was just, I think, about a month ago, we were quite clear, and we put out public service announcements to say that let us not share videos if you haven't seen it for yourself. Make sure that you're fully aware of what's happening. And remember, there is no such thing as too much of planning. So obviously, when these threats come about, whether it's a fuel strike, whether it's a service delivery strike, or whatever it is, the most amount of planning needs to come in a full understanding of how to mitigate that risk at the time of it happening. And these things happen at any point in time, depending on the mobilization of communities by far and large.
Yeah.
Now, when something service delivery related in terms of a protest and something that is quite rightfully your constitutional right, turns into something like looting and it causes violence and it goes against the ambits of the law, then it needs to be spoken to with the might that it actually comes across as, where it causes fear within civil society and creates major economic problems for us, especially in the Durban and eThekwini area. I mean, we're coming through the floods. We can't really afford these sorts of protests and looting to happen ever again, because I can guarantee you, if this happens again in eThekwini, we will never ever recover as a city. As it is, we're struggling in municipality, we're struggling with service delivery, we're struggling with water infrastructure. All of these things are there. And to continually be arguing and fighting and protesting about things doesn't really do anyone any help, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, that's a very ominous warning from your side. Something else, yes, Imtiaz, that I simply cannot miss here. It's got to do with the Phoenix murders during that very same period. Those have been described, at least by some politicians, as a massacre that was happening, and this massacre visited primarily upon black residents of that area. Was there a failure? Was there a failure, particularly on the part of the CPFs, to pick up on these?
Let's be very clear. The CPFs exist in a partnership with police. When the CPFs fail, it's actually police that also fail, and we got to speak to it in the true light that it comes from. Ultimately, law enforcement comes down to the issue of SAPS saying that we are the law and we will enforce the law and we'll make sure that everyone continues within the ambits of the law. Now, when you leave civil society to try and protect themselves, ultimately you are going to get many people not or going into a state of madness. And that is exactly the way you should be describing the July unrest of last year, 2021, because it was a time of complete madness. I mean, I was doing some reflection the other day, and I really cannot remember every single detail of that entire time coming from the 8th to the 15th of July last year. The reason for that is because your mindset and your mentality and the fear that had settled within you leads you to a space of abnormality. And in order to normalize from that, it's going to take a lot. I mean, there are many communities that are suffering from post-traumatic stress, coming from the July unrest, and we don't see it and we don't feel it, but there's fear settled in all parts of communities. Now, when we're speaking to that, we must understand that you gotta fit a punishment to a crime, and obviously not justifying anyone taking another person's life. That is just not on, right? And yes, there has been a lack, but whose fault is it? Can you blame communities directly for protecting themselves? Can you blame SAPS for not instilling the law when they were needed? Who are you blaming? What are we saying? Yes, a massacre has happened. Yes, we need to be apologetic. Yes, we need to understand. However, we need to move on from that now. And we need to all come together and understand that it was a time of madness, it was a time of utter chaos, and no one really knew what to do. But post-mortems from there should give us clear, dedicated disaster management plans of how we react and how do we respond to these sorts of things moving forward as a country and as society as by far and large.
Chairman of the Community Policing Forum in the area of eThekwini Central Cluster, that's Imtiaz Syed. Thank you very much for your time.